In this video, we will talk about how AuthPoint integrates with Microsoft's Remote Desktop Services, or RDS. We will cover two key components of RDS and discuss how AuthPoint integrates into them using both the Logon app and the RD Web app. We will also talk about how to troubleshoot this integration at the end of the video. Let's get started. RDS has several components that make up the overall ecosystem, but we only need to focus on two for the integration with AuthPoint. The first component is RD Web. RD Web is a web portal that users can use in order to access what are called remote apps. AuthPoint adds multi-factor authentication, or MFA, to this portal with the RD Web app. The other RDS component that AuthPoint integrates with is the RD Gateway. When the user runs a remote app, the application executes on the RD Gateway server and the display is sent to the remote user. This enables users to use the Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, to connect to internal computers without a VPN client. RD Gateway performs a separate authentication. We can install the AuthPoint Logon app onto internal computers to secure the RDP connections that pass through the RD Gateway with MFA. But AuthPoint can only secure remote apps that use RDP. The rest of this video will focus on the AuthPoint RD Web app. For more detailed information on installing and using the Logon app, refer to our Using the AuthPoint Logon app video. There are some system requirements to keep in mind when installing the AuthPoint RD Web app into the RD Web server. The server must run Windows Server 2012 R2 or higher and must have .NET Framework 4.7.2 or higher installed. Here is a diagram that shows the RDS authentication flow with AuthPoint MFA. Step 0 represents the initial configuration, where we install the AuthPoint RD Web app on the RD Web server along with a configuration file. In Step 1, the user attempts to log in to the RD Web portal and the RD Web server validates the user's credentials via Active Directory. In Step 2, the RD Web app sends the user to AuthPoint, where they are prompted to supply their second factor in order to authenticate and reach the portal. After the user authenticates, they can download and use the remote apps to initiate a separate connection through the RD Gateway, represented by Step 3, to connect to the internal network with RDP. The Logon app must be installed on the internal computer to protect the RDP connection in Step 3 with MFA. Now we'll cover how to configure AuthPoint. Here we are on the WatchGuard Cloud dashboard. We'll start by going to Configure at the top, then AuthPoint. Then we'll go to Resources on the left. We already have the Logon app set up and installed on our internal computers, so we just need to create a new RD Web resource. We'll select the RD Web resource from the list and click Add. We'll configure the resource name, then under FQDN we need to add the full domain name of the RD Web portal that we want to integrate with, including all subdomains. We also need to select an AuthPoint certificate from our account, which will be used for communication to the RD Web server. If you have multiple certificates, we recommend that you select the certificate with the latest expiration date. When we create resources, we also need to define how users will authenticate to those resources based on their groups. I have clicked Authentication Policies on the left, which is where we configure these settings. In this account, I only have a single group for my users, and I already have a policy in place that enforces multi-factor authentication for the group. This policy is applied to all resources on the account, so my new resource is already included and my users are authorized to use it. You can use authentication policies and policy objects to configure the level of access that you need for all of the different users in your environment. For more information about authentication policies and how to configure them, refer to the Using AuthPoint Authentication Policies video. On the Downloads page on the left, we can find information about the RD Web app, and we can download both the installer and the configuration file. Here we are on a Windows 2016 server with the RDS role installed. We have the installer and configuration file for RD Web here in the same directory, and we must be logged into the server as a local administrator. We'll run the installer, and after a short time it completes. The RD Web app is installed as a service on the server, which must be running for the integration to work correctly. There are no additional settings or configuration. Once installed, all logons to the RD Web portal now require MFA based on the access policy we configured in AuthPoint. Here is the RD Web portal for this server. We will provide our credentials to log in, and the RD Web app sends us over to AuthPoint to provide our second factor of authentication. We will type our one-time password, and once we have authenticated, we are sent back to the RD Web portal where we can download a remote app for RDP. When we run this remote app, it requires us to authenticate again to the RD gateway. Once that's done, we establish a remote connection to the internal computer, and the logon app prompts us for MFA again. We need to provide a second factor to log on to the desktop of this computer. The logon app automatically sends me a push request which I can accept to authenticate. What do we do to troubleshoot RDS issues? When trying to log in, the RD Web logon page will display error messages to the users if Active Directory denies the authentication. The AuthPoint RD Web app will also show the users errors in the event of a problem, along with a request ID. Both the RD Web app and the Logon app log any authentication errors to the audit logs in WatchGuard Cloud. If we search for unauthorized, we can see a failed logon here. Let's click on the log to get more details, including the reason for the failure. The RD Web app runs as a service on the RD Web server. If the RD Web logons are not being sent to AuthPoint correctly, check that the service for the app is running and that the app is able to reach WatchGuard Cloud. If you run into issues when installing the RD Web app, there are a couple things you can try. Make sure you are running the app as a local or domain administrator. To force this, open an elevated command prompt and change the directory to the location of the RD Web app. Then use the MSI exec command to try running the app installer. This can clear up permissions errors. If the installer is still not working, run MSI exec again with these additional arguments to output any log information generated from the installation process. That will do it for the integration into RDS. In this video, we covered the difference between RD Web and RD Gateway, how to deploy AuthPoint to fully protect the RDS ecosystem, and how to troubleshoot authentication and installation issues.